And of course, good evening. It's September 26th, 2024, and welcome to another one of our Branches on the Vine with the Bible Project in the Sermon on the Mount series. The Bible Project created this series to cover the entire year. They release another episode every 5 weeks. We will discuss these videos and the other creative topics that they present. Because the videos we're going to be discussing, they're just the tip of the iceberg. They're part of our learning series that I highly recommend, and they can all be found on the Bible Project app. Link is in the description. So welcome this evening to Episode 8, Sermon on the Mount. This is our Part 1, Wealth and Worry, on the Dusty Feet. And before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, then click the subscribe button. The reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, you need to click that like button, because that is how YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. So again, this sermon is found in Matthew 5 through 7, and it's the seminal moment in the teachings of Jesus. This is his most extended, his most profound, the broadest teaching we have recorded in all of Scripture. And it covers things that we like to talk about. Yet deep down, I think we have challenges living. Sermon on the Mount, Episode 8, Wealth and Worry. So let's watch the video, again just to refresh us, and we'll see where it takes us. Enjoy.
Jesus of Nazareth was a first-century Jewish man who claimed that he was uniting God's domain above with our domain below. He called this the arrival of God's kingdom.
Jesus invited people to follow him so they could enter into that heavenly realm here on earth in their day-to-day lives. And that's what he's talking about in the collection of teachings called the Sermon on the Mount.
Now, if you really believed that God's heavenly life was available here and now, that would change your perspective on just about everything,
including your possessions. In fact, Jesus said the biggest obstacle to experiencing God's heavenly life and presence is our stuff. The word Jesus uses literally means the stored up things, so our storage.
Okay. Yeah, some people do have a lot of stuff, but it's natural to collect things. Stuff can make life easier. Stuff can give me security. Stuff gives me freedom.
Well, we think that it does, but Jesus says not so much.
Don't store up your stuff on the land, where moths and nibblers destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Okay, but what if I just protect my stuff?
All right, but now your attention is going to be on keeping your stuff safe. Jesus says the good life comes when our attention is directed elsewhere.
Store up for yourselves the stuff of the sky. Sky stuff? What's this sky stuff?
Well, it's a kind of stuff that is so secure that it can't ever be threatened. And it's different from our stuff here on earth. It's the stuff that God's heavenly kingdom is made of. And the more you collect it, the more you'll experience that kingdom here on earth.
All right, how do I get that kind of stuff?
Well, Jesus said that we can experience God's heavenly kingdom now, when we love God and love our neighbor. It's that rich experience of peace and fulfillment, those moments when heaven and earth unite when we follow the teachings of Jesus.
Like a kind word or an act of generosity? Offering forgiveness and showing compassion?
Yes, store up that kind of stuff. Because the loving relationships that we cultivate now will last into the renewed creation. And what we store up has a way of slowly shaping us in its image, for better or worse. Or, as Jesus puts it,
where your stored up things are, there too will be your heart. Okay, so I should focus my hopes and desires on what really matters.
Right. In fact, next, Jesus uses a vivid image to describe this focus.
The lamp of the body is the eye. So then, if your eye is good, your whole body will be radiant.
This phrase, good eye, is the figure of speech in the Hebrew Bible for being really generous, while a bad eye is a metaphor for being stingy, hoarding your stuff. Jesus warns that a bad eye is the quickest way to ruin yourself.
But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be dark. If the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Yikes. so maybe I should give away all my stuff.
Maybe. Jesus once told a wealthy man to do just that. Ultimately, it's about our priorities. Here, Jesus tells a parable.
No one is able to serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You are not able to serve God and wealth.
Wealth is like a tyrant that demands our loyalty.
I might think I own my stuff, but before long, my stuff will own me.
And this danger is real. And so Jesus is pretty blunt. Our stuff can prevent us from experiencing the union of heaven and earth in our lives.
Okay, but let's be real. I need things to survive. I need food, I need clothes.
Well, Jesus has one final teaching about our stuff that brings all these ideas together. He invites us to consider how God has packed creation with abundance, each creature having just what it needs. Jesus says that if you trust God as a generous Father and prioritize loving God and loving others, you will find that your needs are met. And you'll find the rich peace of heaven and earth uniting in your own life.
I say to you all, don't worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, not even about your body, what you'll put on. Isn't life more than food and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. How they don't sow seed, and they don't harvest, and they don't gather into barns, and yet your Father in the skies feeds them. Aren't you much more valuable than they are? And who among you is able to add an hour to your life by worrying? And about clothing, why are you all so worried? Pay attention to the lilies of the field, how they grow. They don't labor, and they don't weave cloth. But I tell you all, not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. Now, if the grass of the field, which is there today and tomorrow is tossed into the furnace, is clothed this way by God, won't he make sure to clothe you all who have so little trust? So then don't be worried, saying, what will we eat? Or what will we drink? Or what will we wear for clothing? For the nations constantly seek for all this stuff. For your Father in the skies knows that you need all this. Rather, first, seek for the kingdom of God, and do right by God, and all these things will be added to you. So then, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow can worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. That was the teachings of Jesus on generosity and trusting God with our stuff.
Next, Jesus will offer wisdom about judging ourselves instead of judging other people.
So, what'd you think? So one of the things I like about the Bible Project is that their videos as a whole, is that they're just the launching point. They get the ball rolling. I mean, that entire teaching point is rarely made there. This is the beginning of a much larger discussion. These are from the Sermon on the Mount, so they're just the tip of the iceberg. Let's look underwater, see what we might find. Jesus' perspective on wealth and worry. This is our part one. So we find talks like these when we go to Scripture, when we banter these words around. It sounds a little easier. I just think it's more challenging. One thing I found is that there are many discussions of parables. The meaning of the parables, sometimes a little unclear. So we have a vague story with, I think at times, an ambiguous point. And that makes it challenging for us. I understand. And I agree. So this is where we must figure out how to work this out. Maybe even how to walk this out. So one of the things that we're challenged with is that we're saving up. And to be fair, little thought goes into who's keeping the account and whether we can check it. Does that make sense? In other words, when we have a savings account and we put money in it, we always can go back and look and see the balance. What have I done? How's it growing? Stuff like that. But when we get to these things like this, where we're storing stuff in the sky, as the words that they chose to use, I'm okay with that. How's that work? How do we know it's there? I mean, if we've done something, we do something, we have something, we don't know it's there, maybe it's part of the problem? Maybe it is, I think, with this. Because let's be honest, it's hard to say I've stored something up there when you need to know what you've stored and help check it. I mean, is it really there? I mean, these are real questions. These are real questions to think about. I know I've been asked these questions from people often, and it makes sense. Because we don't talk about scripture like this. We get into a story a lot like this, and we're going to see what we think we might see, but it's an interesting challenge as to how we might honestly view this. So we get to this. We get to love God and love your neighbor, which is the richness of this whole experience, right? But that's one of our challenges. How do we love God? How do we love each other? Because that's going to be actually an expression. It's going to demonstrate itself somewhere. Because that's what God talked about before this. Scroll upon scroll upon scroll, right? That's where we're getting into our decisions, right? Now we're talking about the entire Old Testament. I mean, we've had various videos discussing this, yeah? One's from Aleph Beta, other ones from the Bible Project. But part of this is to determine what this, because we're talking about here in this context, is worth. If it's something to be valued, to be stored, right? Remember, when we talk about storing stuff up in heaven, if there's something of value to be stored there, what is it? We get to these moments where we go, okay, so we've been told that a particular set of instructions is no longer valuable to us. So we tend to dismiss those, when in reality, what we have with Jesus talking about this point is he gets them back to this. He says that is where you're going to find out where this valuable behavior is found. Do you hear what I said? This is where that valuable behavior is found. Because of how they're talking here, it seems, I tend to agree, that these are actions. This is behavior. Others see this, and I want to make this very clear. It's experienced by others, not just ourselves. Because we just finished talking about some of these things that you do in private or that other people don't know about. I'll bite on the other seeing part, except that in this action, seen is actually people experiencing it, those experiencing it. Does that make sense? In other words, these people, they're experiencing it, are experiencing the love you're caring for somebody, right? Still, other people might know about it or not know about it. So there's not a big group knowing, but somebody has to experience it, and we know that God sees it. I mean, it doesn't appear that what we're talking about here and what Tim and John are talking about here is if you pray enough, that's prayer. That's what gets stored up in the skies in heaven, right? Because that's an interesting thought. Because maybe we think, what if we just pray a lot? We're doing this prayer for others. I mean, that's part of what this is, right? Then we don't see this, though, in what Jesus is talking about this stuff. And we saw the Father ask for these things in the past. It's just one of those things. But that makes it challenging. And it gives us a lot to think about. So then we get to this, where we're talking about wealth. That's just one piece. But it's fascinating with this teaching on this topic, because wealth part that we'll get to, it's only 6 verses. And we're going to continue on wealth, right? But we realize that the anxiety or worry, well, that's a whole nother 10 more verses. Interesting. But one of the things that also interesting here is how in reality, I think, we think about our own lives, our wealth, the accumulation of wealth, worrying about what's driving our lives, that kind of thing. And say, in my time on earth, and to be fair with those I've been around, I think fewer people experience wealth accumulation issues than anxiety and worry. Because I think it's more about day-to-day living than acquiring and holding on to what drives you. It's about day-to-day life and paycheck to paycheck. I mean, many more people experience that. Day-to-day food. I think from a global perspective, it's more of I think it's more of a daily thought there than it is how am I managing my wealth? But let's continue as we get to this wealth worry part. Both of those look deep into the heart, right? We're getting deep there. And I think it's vital. And that's where they go with this in their graphic. Because the graphic goes from that stark real life thing, right, to this heart realm where we see our focus. It's going to show up in a few different ways, right? They mentioned other teachings with the words that included compassion, helping somebody else, acts of generosity, and these other things that are towards others that Jesus has been teaching. I think they are. However, I think it's Jesus merely saying this is what you should already be doing. My Father already told you to do this. This is not a new thing. I'm not bringing up something new. Because Jesus teaches this, and it isn't a shock that he's talking about what his Father had laid out, right? He's reminding them that this is what they should have been doing. He's reminding them. You cannot remind them of something that doesn't already exist, right? It already had been said. Remember? So Jesus constantly returns to them, right? He's reminding them that this is where you will get the what to do and the who those are when we talk about those acts of compassion. Because it's actually in the Torah. But it's funny. People, because they automatically push that away, so they aren't bothered to look at it, I suggest maybe you look into it. Just to see what it looks like. It just might look like this. However, we do tend not to look in that direction. But the author of this teaching, who reminds us this is very much what Jesus is talking about. One of those neat points that we get to where Jesus says, where your heart is, where your stored up things are, right? That's where your heart is. In other words, where's your real savings account? I know, I mentioned. Okay, so now, let's go here. Remember when I mentioned how you know that it's there? Because I think that's a great question. I mean, it is. And I don't think there's a concrete answer. However, our faith is in God, right? I mean, we trust his son, the Messiah, and we see this evidence in his life and his actions. So then we can say, okay, that's where my value is. So I will do things here in this life, on this earth, that God feels is valuable and essential. Because I don't think it's a waste to be here, that our lives don't matter, because what's interesting is the stored up things, the value, those rewards. And if our life doesn't matter, this teaching has a problem, because it expects behavior, a life lived with actions towards others. Because it's not about stuff. We've already determined that. It's not about what you collect here. But I agree, this is how we view it, and this is why it's very different between that earthly and heavenly thought. So then we get that wonderful little phrase that they use, the good eye in Hebrew. And the good eye is, it's an analogy for being very generous, yeah? I like that for multiple reasons. But the biggie is that you get to see the value in something. So there's a show. What's the name of that show? I don't remember the name. Antique Roadshow. Something where somebody would bring something in and somebody would look at it. They start to realize that it actually is something of value. It's not just some old piece of something that doesn't have much value. Looking at it, and they see that value. So when we get to these points, where we're looking at somebody, any person, do we see them as valuable? Do we understand that? Do you understand what I'm saying? Do we see the worthwhile in people? So what do we do with things of value, right? We cherish them. We take care of them. We protect them. So to use the analogy here, we might do that with a car or do it with people. So if our mind has shifted from seeing people as more valuable than things, then that changes our focus. It changes the way you look at something. Because your eye now wants to see the value in people. Because when we see Jesus' life, we see this constant look at the value of people, right? Whether they are seen by others as valuable, which he addresses pretty often. And now we should see them as valuable, because they are of great value in the kingdom. Even then, yet there were people that maybe we didn't think were valuable, that they didn't think were valuable. The Roman centurion. Or I would suggest that there's a good possibility that they probably didn't see them as of much value. Yet, we have an exciting and intimate moment with this, because the faith that he exhibits, what Jesus does in his life, even furthers his faith. Yeah. So I think this value is significant, and it shows how we tend to look at something. Lots of things. I have a little interesting take on this, and I want to take a little detour here. I like to do that, and I want to talk about the value of something like the rest of creation, the rest of the things that God created. Somebody used to say that God creates humans. We get this. I get that. But I want to stretch and say that value that we put on the rest of creation, not just people, but the rest of animals, nature, and the end value that we see in it, in its care, in its protection. Because I want to return to the garden. I want to say, these are the things that you're supposed to do. part of it is taking care of this, right? People, animals, the planet, right? So the value is what you put on those things, where we will see what that looks like in the heavenlies, right? In the skies, in that account. That's what's going to be interesting. But this is all directly tied to what Jesus is talking about here, where we feel our value is in this long-term point, right? Because we're not going to see the reward. Not now. Because most of us want that payout now, on our time, right? I want to do good, and then I want to get something for it. We can see it, and we want to be sure of it. I mean, karma will eventually come to me. Yet Jesus, he's talking about storing up in the skies. Let's be honest. To coin an ancient phrase, it's a bank passbook that we're going to never see. Our banker, he's storing it, and he's going to dole it out on that day, the Lord's day. But then again, even then, at their time, they were focused on him, the Messiah, coming into his own then. So that was their now. Then, wanting it now. Yet that payout, and the payout that we're expecting, well, we're still waiting for it. That's it. We must consider what was brought up, which is very important because it isn't so much thought challenging as it is that it becomes thought challenging. What I mean by that is when Tim and John bring up the point of abundance, that God has given you all that you need and you should be content and that should be enough. It's an interesting thought to consider because we all are in different places. We're all at other times. We all are in those times, and it stretches us to see this, especially because most of us live paycheck to paycheck. So we're in this thought of, am I really taken care of? I mean, is this true? Is this really what that means? Because we'd like to read that all your needs are provided for. I'm just not sure we see it. So that's it's a complex question because on the surface, it doesn't seem like something that we like when we read it. I mean, it sounds perfect when Tim and John are reading it, but when you're sitting in your chair, wherever you're at, talking amongst yourselves about this, because it seems, according to them, you have everything you need, and many people listening might not need some clarification on that. You know, I'm not talking about the folks who always want more or that we need to reevaluate what needs versus wants are. That's important. But the bottom line is needs. Okay, I want to use a simple example. Maybe not, but it's very contextual for our day. This is why I like it. We have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So according to Maslow, everyone has these 5 categories of needs. We have physical needs, include food, water, warmth, rest. We have safety needs, security and safety. Belongingness, love needs, those intimate relationships and friends, that community. And then esteem needs, the prestige, feeling of accomplishment, self-actualization involves achieving one's, say, full potential, and that includes one's creative activities. So the first 2 are what we might call fight or flight needs, yeah? One that drives us to the root level, those basic needs, physical needs, safety needs. Next are psychological needs, things that need to connect with. And the last, of course, are the self-actualization, self-fulfillment. So it's interesting if we look at these, and I'm fully prepared for pushback on this entirely, especially amongst yourselves, because this will be challenging if Maslow's hierarchy is applicable. I mean, is this valid? I'm not here to tear apart Maslow in any way, shape, or form. I just want us to think about this because our culture operates under the Maslow hierarchy today. Right? This is how our culture is formulated today. It becomes intentional or not. It's our default response as we approach these discussion centers. So, if these are our basic needs, and God is saying, I'm there for your needs, where does this fit? Is God talking about with Jesus here, right? The bottom two, the bottom four, all five? This rabbit hole, way too deep to go down here now, but it's genuine. How we approach some of these things and the challenges created when we look at them unintentionally, we drag this into that need category. We drag this in because it's part of our Western culture. I think it's part of a global culture. Because I believe this shape, even though it's rough around the edges, but I guess you could plug this into just about any culture around, and how would this fit in that? I think we could take some of the aspects from an individual thought process and in another culture might use it in a more communal thought process. I tend to lean that direction. But these are challenging to discuss. Remember, we love to read it. We just have challenges living it, and sometimes getting deep into what we discuss. This is going to be a great segue as we get ready for our second part. We're going to talk about anxiety. We're going to talk about worry. Because what we're talking about here is going to take us into that very next area. It's going to be interesting to see how we are. Because I'm going to discuss this. So keep this thought in mind. Think about Maslow as we prepare for the second part of episode 8, Wealth and Worry, in 2 weeks. So don't forget, the description below includes a link to the Folks of the Bible Project and a link to the app, so you can follow along and see each one as it premieres and the additional topics it discusses. Because this will continue to be an exciting and thought-provoking journey in the Sermon on the Mount. I just wonder what we're going to continue to uncover. So, thank you for being with us tonight with more on the Sermon on the Mount on another edition of The Dusty Feet.